To all those who give birth to, homes to, or just give thought to people adopted as infants, thanks for considering adoption.
Welcome to CaribNation Crosstalk. I'm David Hinds. From the time of the Federation of 1958 to 1962 to the present Caricom arrangement, the Anglophone Caribbean has grappled with the whole issue of integration, whether as small economies they could make it on their own. And so therefore, the enduring question has always been, how and when will the Caribbean become integrated? There has been talk recently about a Caribbean single market and economy, the CSME. We want to zero in on that today. We want to talk about what is the CSME? Is it possible in the current circumstances? Are the attempts that have already been made been successful? With me to discuss this issue today is a distinguished panel. First, we have Mr. Curtis Ward, who is a lawyer by profession, but a political activist, a former diplomat, master of all trades, as we would say. Curtis, welcome to CaribNation Crosstalk. And Mr. Anton Edmonds, who is the Executive Secretary of Caribbean Central American Action, an NGO here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Edmonds, welcome to CaribNation Crosstalk.
Thanks for having me.
Gentlemen, let's get straight to the point. Curtis, I'll start with you. For the benefit of the audience who may not know what is the CSME, what is this CSME, the Caribbean Single Market and Economy?
The CSME is an effort by Caricom member states to put in place a common market, a common economic space, and a common economy. It is really being done in two stages. First, the common market, and the common economy is expected to come later. 12 countries of the original CARICOM states have already signed and ratified the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which switched over from CARICOM and the common market to the CSME. The CSME also includes a new court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, which provides for original jurisdiction for dispute settlements under the CSME.
Anton, there is an assumption on the part of those of us who talk about Caribbean development and Caribbean integration that integration is almost a given. Speak to that. Do you share that view? If so, where does it come from?
The assumption that integration is a given is in some senses well-founded or well thought through, especially when you look at the market size of the economies of the region and you look at issues of security and the fact that the region is finding it harder and harder to negotiate or to interact with the international community as individual countries, and there is a need for these countries to integrate. But realistically, there are countries in the region that are more developed than others. There are some who are more newly independent than others. So when you look at the political atmosphere in the region, the integration process has not necessarily been as smooth and as easy as one would have hoped.
So the ideal of integration, the political aspect of integration, is what the political and cultural aspect of integration is what is pushing the process, Curtis. Is there some kind of tension between that political and cultural imperative that Anton talks about and the actual political and economic realities that have developed since independence?
I think what is really driving it is more the economic realities in a globalized world, where small economies are not competitive and cannot become competitive in a global sense. The CSME is aimed at maximizing the use of labor, capital, and natural resources across the region. It creates free movement of labor, free movement of capital, and equal treatment. It creates a common external tariff. It creates a common economic policy. All these things are being put in place, some ahead of others, but this is basically the objective.
Anton, you want to jump in there? Is it as easy, simple as that?
Well, I think that Ambassador Ward is right on track in terms of the objective. The reality, however, is that it's taking a long time.
And let's talk about that reality. Tell me two major reasons that it's taking such a long time.
Because I believe the region continues to be fragmented on certain issues. There are, and I pointed this out earlier, that there are economies within our region that are more developed than others. When you look at the Caribbean and the Caricom region, and if you were to include, for example, Haiti into the equation, you're looking at 18 million people. You're looking at countries like Barbados and Trinidad that are high flying. The Bahamas, for example, which has always been, in a sense, the odd man out. Mm-hmm. And you look at some of the Eastern Caribbean economies that are much smaller, that are in some instances fearful of the larger economies of Jamaica.
That's what I want you to get at. How does that disparity, that economic disparity that you're talking about, how does it work against integration?
Well, it creates a certain amount of fear. And I think that fear in terms of the business communities in those smaller jurisdictions, the political leadership in some instances, that when you talk about sort of a supranational political institution or environment, an economic environment where decisions are being made on a regional basis versus on a local basis, it becomes very difficult for leadership, for politicians, for members of the business community to cede that kind of responsibility to neighbors on the outside, and you're not exactly sure in some instances where the direction that they would like to take the region, whether it's consistent with some of the smaller economies.
Curtis, one can't argue with some of the points that are, all of the points that Anton has raised there, but let me ask you, is that enough? Is that fair enough for one to opt out of the single market and the economy?
No, but let me just put this in perspective in a sense, because the Caribbean community at the moment is much further ahead on a timeline basis than the European Union was trying to do the same thing for Europe. Granted, the economies of Europe are perhaps more complex and have greater impact on the world itself. But the Caribbean is actually way ahead on that timeline in terms of bringing it all together. And this is to the credit of some driving forces in the Caribbean, including the private sector. There are members of the private sector who see this as an opportunity to move capital around within the Caribbean to take advantage of consumer as well as other resources that may be available. And just to point out, Anton mentioned that there are, 18,000, 19,000 population within it. You have Suriname, 6,000.
6 million.
6 million, I'm sorry, 6 million. I wasn't talking about St. Lucia. Suriname, 6 million. 3 weeks ago, the Parliament of Haiti passed legislation to ratify the revised treaty to become a full participant in the CSME. So we're under another 8 million plus. The market is growing internally. And because of some of the things that are being put in place. Yes, Anton is absolutely correct. There are a lot of disparities between the economies in the Caribbean and the size of the economies. But when it comes down to it, the integration of these economies, albeit moving slowly, there are already some instances where you can see cross-border investments. There is already established a regional stock market, although only Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados are participating in this at the moment.
On that note, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the tension between politics at the local level, at the national level, and the reality of the single market and economy. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
Thanks for all the adventures we'll have. Thanks for all the ropes we'll jump, the books we'll read, and things we'll make. Thanks for all the notes we'll play. Flowers we'll pick. Baths we'll take. Secrets we'll share. Races we'll run. And smiles we'll give. Thanks for all the joy we'll bring. The laughs we'll share. And dreams we'll dream. Thanks.
To all those who give birth to, homes to, or just give thought to people adopted as infants.
Thanks.
Thanks for considering adoption.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to CaribNation.
Both people inside and outside are
Very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories, and events that affects Caribbean life.
The Caribbean single market and economy. Is this something that is a big problem, Anton?
I don't view it as a big problem. I think one of the things that every time there's a change in administration, there's always a revision of agreements, and we need to give new politicians an opportunity and some time to come up to speed, especially those who may be in the opposition or those who are new and I say the game, but it's not a game, the game of politics. One of the things that I want to be very, very clear on is that there is an inevitability about a single market and economy. It has to happen. There are trials and tribulations, and as you point out, politically, there are some who are questioning how fast the integration process is going internally from a domestic and a regional standpoint, and some of them who are concerned that they are being pulled along for the ride and they're not necessarily guiding or driving the car themselves. But the reality of our region, of this particular region, is that the region has to come together in the face of globalization. The region has to face the world as a single market where investment and investors can come in and feel comfortable that they can move from country to country. One of the things that Ambassador Ward pointed out in terms of the movement or the current movement of investment across borders, one of the things that I would say is that has happened in spite of the delays of the CSME and in spite of the delays in the establishment in the Caribbean Court of Justice and all of these things, is that within the region there's this recognition that there are regional markets that some of our larger companies would like to get involved in and need to get involved in if they expect to grow their businesses. But the political linkages that have to be created and the economic linkages that have to be created, and I say they have to. There's no turning back for the Caribbean.
Prime Minister Golden of Jamaica came to power and said that Jamaica would not necessarily follow the same kind of course that the previous government followed. He opted for more a single market rather than a single economy. How significant is that?
Well, the timeline for the single economy is way behind. There is no question about that. 'Cause that really has to do with fiscal policy and monetary policy and some other issues which will take some time to work out. But as far as the single market is concerned, there's quite that advanced considerably. Bear in mind, 12 of the 15 CARICOM countries have already ratified the revised treaty.
But have they been really active?
They have
in participating and in supporting the process.
All 12 have adopted domestic legislation to implement much of the single market, not the single economy. We have to distinguish between the two here, because single economy also would bring in place common fiscal policy and so on and so forth, maybe a common currency. All these things will take quite a bit of time. But as far as the single market is concerned, in terms of the common external tariffs and so on, the movement of labor is already starting to take place. They've already agreed on certain levels of qualifications, and certification of labor is taking place. They're talking about putting in place a CARICOM passport for movement within the region.
Let me pin you down on labor, because as I listen to the two of you, I hear you talk about the movement of capital, and I know that is an important aspect. How does this single market and economy benefit the ordinary worker, the ordinary farmer in St. Lucia, in St. Vincent, in Guyana, in Jamaica? How would this impact them, Anton?
Well, I'll be honest with you. One of the at least as
Please be honest.
as an outsider looking in, one of the concerns, and I say an outsider because I'm based here, but I do travel throughout the region all the time. One of the concerns that I've always had was whether the movement of labor was an exclusive thing. Whether, you know, when you talk about qualifications and skill sets. Now I understand that there may very well have been a little bit of a fail-safe mechanism put in place so that you don't have just this movement of immigration from more depressed economies to other economies that are more advanced. But it is a little bit unnerving at times when you pass the words and you talk about this establishment of qualifications and the question as to, well, who fits into these qualifications? Does this really impact all of our societies, or does it only impact people like myself who have advanced degrees and who have certain sellable skills which allow us to move from country to country?
Curtis?
Yes.
Does it?
There is concern about that. But the reality is, as Anton quite rightly says, is that there's no way CARICOM country, any country is going to agree to open its borders to any movement of people to come in and flood a market and then create havoc in that economy.
And would that not impact on the pace of the integration movement?
It will, in a sense, but you can all remember now, with a CARICOM passport, you'll be able to travel throughout the region. But if you're coming there to work, you have to fit into certain categories. And we're not talking about just people with college degree or technical degrees. We're talking about artisans. We're talking about carpenters, welders, masons. These are people, once certified in their countries, will be able to seek employment in other countries. Just to give an example, Canada is importing skilled people, but they have to be certified. Granted, Trinidad is importing skilled people, many from China, while there are people in the Caribbean who would qualify, but because the system is not in place, it is not opened up to accept people of skill.
Is there something beneath all of this, Anton, that we are not seeing, some tensions beneath all of this that we're not talking about in a frontal way?
In terms of the labor issue?
In terms of the labor issue, the movement, especially of not the kind of certified education type of labor, but the kind of labor that you were talking about, welders and carpenters and farmers and so on and so forth.
Look, I think that everything is always well-intentioned, and I believe that the CSME, it's a commitment that we all have when you look at integration and the development of the region. And I think that it was very well-intentioned that when one looks at the issue of the movement of labor, that you have to be able to set in mechanisms where you do not have this sort of rush of everyone from one domicile to the next. And of course, economies themselves would seek to protect themselves from that kind of a rush. I don't believe that I would not like to believe that those who crafted this viewed it as a mechanism to only benefit the elite. But I think that when we get down to brass tacks, and for the CSME to work for all, that at some point in time, and it may not be initially, but at some point in time down the road, the issues of, yes, you can have a Caricom passport, but the ease of one's ability to get a work permit in a different country, the ease of one's ability to transfer one's social security from one domicile to the next are going to be some of the real issues that the governments of the region and businesses of the region are going to have to tackle. Because at the end of the day, once we get beyond the initial mechanism of skilled people, and you really start talking about an integrated group of countries, there has to be a mechanism that allows the common man to move from domicile to domicile.
I want to get both of you in on this issue of intra-Caribbean trade, which has really lagged behind. Has there been any movement since they've begun to implement the single market? Has there been any increase in intra-Caribbean trade?
I don't have the data, but it is in place based on the other regime that they have put in place to allow the movement of goods within the Caricom space. Even goods entering from outside the Caricom space, once it enters the Caricom space, it is free to move around within the Caricom space. There are some regimes in place to ensure that there is sharing of tariff at from the point of entry. So if country A is the point of entry, that tariff would be placed on the goods there. But if it is then transferred to country B, that tariff would have to be shared with country B. And these regimes are being put in place. Anton mentioned, for instance, the transfer of social security and so on. This regime is actually in place. Trinidad is currently reviewing requests for transfers
Anton,
of social security.
Jump in there on this whole question of intra-Caribbean trade.
I think intra-Caribbean trade, and I maintain that these things happen despite the political process. These things happen. Trinidad right now is a major exporter to the Eastern Caribbean, a major exporter to Jamaica. Jamaica itself, of course, exports readily and easily to the rest of the region. So inter-regional trade is growing, and that's happening without a doubt. In our banking communities, we see consolidation. In the supermarket stores, we see Barbadian stores that basically have majority shareholdings in St. Lucia and in the OECS countries. But I argue that this happens in spite of this, or despite the slow pace in the actual CSME process.
And on that note, gentlemen, we've got to bring this to a close. It's been quite informative here in terms of the perspective that you bring. I want to thank you for coming on to CaribNation Crosstalk. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll wrap it up with Hinds' site, my site.
Thanks for all the adventures we'll have. Thanks for all the ropes we'll jump, the books we'll read, and things we'll make. Thanks for all the notes we'll play, flowers we'll pick, baths we'll take, secrets we'll share, races we'll run, and smiles we'll give. Thanks for all the joy we'll bring, the laughs we'll share, and dreams we'll dream. Thanks.
To all those who give birth to, homes to, or just give thought to people adopted as infants,
Thanks.
Thanks for considering adoption.
When America wants to know what's happening in the Caribbean diaspora, there is one clear choice.
Hello, welcome to CaribNation.
Both people inside and outside are very excited about today's program.
Looking at you, I can tell that you have traveled the journey.
One television organization brings America close to the people, stories, and events that affects Caribbean life. Get close, get answers, get CaribNation.
Welcome back to CaribNation Crosstalk. Everything about Caribbean history, politics, and culture says that we must integrate. The Caribbean is a particular space that was born out of a particular history. As the Black Stallion said, we came on the same ship from the same place. And so therefore, we must either develop together or perish, as one former Prime Minister of the Caribbean said. Caribbean integration is a must. But from my standpoint, the governments of the region must do more to educate the people, to integrate Caribbean integration into the political discourse in their country. One thing is lacking is that whenever there is a choice between the regional and political survival at the national level, our political leaders have chosen the latter. This must stop. For Caribbean integration to move forward, the people must become part of the process. The discourse must include them. And if we do that, then the Caribbean will move forward and face this new phase of globalization as confident as others. Until the next time, this is David Hinds thanking you for looking at another program of CaribNation Crosstalk. And remember, as always, our motto here is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation.